Season 1 of Notebook on Cities and Culture is brought to you by Carl Haley, Daniel Murphy, and Douglas Dollars, who reminds you to be present, be loving, and that life moves really fast. Reading in an interview, you talked about starting Busblog. At the time, I don't know at the time how long ago it was, but now it's been about 11 years. And you started it with the name Busblog because it's saying, I was the only person in Los Angeles riding the bus. And, I rode here on 2 trains that were standing room only. So how much has changed in this town since then?
Well, I would say that I wasn't the only person on the bus. I was probably the only person with a blog on the bus, and maybe the only person whose first language was English on the bus, which isn't derogatory in any way whatsoever with my good friends and fellow bus riders. But I feel like the people who were writing blogs and blog posts in, right around 9/11 in LA were for the most part Hispanic, and I enjoyed being part of that group, but I also wanted to report back to people who weren't Hispanic what it was not only to be a 30-something-year-old man in Los Angeles without a car, but a single one trying to date and get lucky and have a little bit of game, and yet didn't have any wheels.
It is Notebook on Cities and Culture. I'm Colin Marshall, speaking today with Tony Pierce, the author of the Busblog, running since 2001, reporting from Los Angeles. He has a car now, but he didn't then when he started. He's now the blog editor, by the way, at KPCC, one of the major public radio stations, the news public radio station here in Los Angeles. So his career has spanned blogs in several stages of their evolution and several types. Any way that blogs have been used, I think you've had some part in. Now, that's something I hear a lot from guys who have lived carless in Los Angeles. I've been here 8 months or so, but people who were doing it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it was so hard to date. The girls were always like, you don't have a car? With that, not like they were angry, but just like, no, are you serious? Like, maybe you have one and you forgot? Nowadays, you can kind of play the green angle or what have you, and you're good. Right. But then it was like, no way.
Well, I'm here to tell you it wasn't that hard. In fact, they did. You're right. They did say, "Are you being serious?" But I think they found it quirky in a positive way, interesting. It wasn't really a negative. So anybody who says that it was a negative to them, I bet you they would have had a hard time if they had a car.
Now, Busblog, it's not. I mean, I don't do it justice to say that it has been just about riding the bus, because it's not now, and even then, it wasn't just about any one thing, nor was it just truth, or nor was it just fiction. I mean, it says nothing in here is true,
right?
Which is that's a fascinating ploy is not the word, but what kind of freedom does it give you?
It gives me enough freedom that if I do want to just BS and tell non-truths, I'm allowed to. And in many ways, you're able to be more honest when you have that kind of a moniker. I really look at it the way that when I read Hemingway or when I listened to Tom Petty, those guys were like, oh, yeah, well, this is just – it's not necessarily meant to be about me, but deep down you knew it really was about them. But it seemed to me that internet writing wasn't allowed that kind of freedom. And to be able to put fiction on a novel, you're able to do anything you want. And as a creative person or an aspiring creative person, I wanted to have as much freedom as anybody. And so, yeah, it allowed me to not write about the bus. It allowed me to pretend that I was a superhero solving crimes. It allowed me to say that I had a date with Anna Kournikova the night before. And instead, I was dating other people. But whenever they would say, hey, why did you write about us? I could say, I pretended you were Anna Kournikova or Mariah Carey. Isn't that okay? And they laughed and said, okay, it's okay. So,
tell me about the state of blogging in 2001. I mean, was the word in existence yet? Or what did you call what you were doing back then? Because I can't remember using the word blog even until the mid-2000s. I mean, was it just a web page? Or what were you in your mind doing then?
Well, I was definitely selling out because before blogging, I had just plain old TonyPierce.com, where I was creating actual web pages that were full screen, had what I considered to be very beautiful color, and I would have on the background of the screen, let's say a beautiful model laying on the rocks, and above her was this clean blue sky. And I would write in HTML text in the clean blue sky. And so it was a full featured thing where you would click her ear and that would go to the next page. That would be a totally different scene with a different model or maybe just a car. And I was able to tell stories on full screen. But yes, blog was around in 2001. In fact, I believe it started in around 1999 when Ev Williams, who now created Twitter, created Blogger. And it's just a shortening of weblog. And so it was a sellout to do Busblog because the audience really, really wanted blogs. They were like, okay, well, your web pages are great, but where do I leave comments? And where's your archives? And how come it doesn't look like this guy's? And I was like, well, because that guy sucks. And I was still like, well, okay, I could do that. And so the first year it was a combination of both web pages that led to the Busblog and then the Busblog leading to my web pages.
When you began Busblog, how long had you been in Los Angeles at that point?
Oh, a while. I came out here in 84, and so I started the Busblog in 2001.
And I want to get the history in here for the listeners. Now, you, like me, went to UC Santa Barbara, but...
Go Gauchos.
Go Gauchos, but earlier than I did. But you describe on Busblog sort of a childhood, teenage longing to be in Los Angeles. Did that longing still obtain throughout the UCSB years, or were you still saying, Isla Vista is great, but I got to get to Los Angeles?
No, I wanted to stay in. As soon as I got to Isla Vista and really understood what Isla Vista was all about in Santa Barbara, I wanted to stay there forever.
We should teach the audience what Isla Vista is all about, because they won't know. I mean, you see Santa Barbara, maybe they know about that. They might not know Santa Barbara's 100 miles from Los Angeles. A lot of people think it's right next door. Right. It's quite separate. It's almost secluded. Isla Vista is the student neighborhood next to, almost touching the UCSB campus, not affiliated, but unaffiliated enough that students, even when I was there, could do pretty much what they wanted. And when you were there, they could do what?
They could truly live the lives that they wanted to live. If you look at the map of California, you might see what appears to be a small boob. Isla Vista and UCSB is the nipple on that boob. It's a peninsula in a lot of ways, whereas half of it, the southern half, is the campus, and the northern half is Isla Vista. So you actually have more beach than you could possibly deal with. Isn't that your experience of it too? I think so.
I mean, I certainly didn't deal with the entire beach there. I mean, I didn't have the time really, but it was there. Nice to know, right?
And it was so close that my first night at UC Santa Barbara in the dorms of San Nick, I heard the strange sound in the middle of the night, and I asked my friend, "What the heck is that sound?" And he's like, "Dude, that's the waves." So you could hear the waves from your dorm, and I was totally enamored. Not that I'm a surfer or enjoy the beach as much as I probably should, but as a Midwesterner, there's something about that ocean that totally attracted me to California, and to be able to experience that from UCSB and later Isla Vista was absolutely fantastic.
Something about the wave sound, but also the sound of the bell tower on campus as well. You could always hear both, and that was kind of you felt like you were between these two worlds, right?
Mm-hmm. You always knew what time it was. As most college students deal with, you experience drunkenness and then the hangover, and with your eyes closed, when that bell tower rang, you knew, do I have an hour left before I have to wake up and go to class, or have I blown it? Right. Have I overslept by an hour or two?
Now, when you were there, when you showed up to Isla Vista, was couch burning a thing at that time, or was that, okay, even then, you're nodding yes. Even I haven't figured that out. I mean, it mystified me then when I was there, and it still kind of does. Were you ever in the loop as far as understanding the art of couch burning in Isla Vista?
Absolutely. It was, most of the furniture that students get were leftovers from their families, and the couches that would populate the living quarters of most apartments were the ones that were either in the guest rooms or in the garages of their parents. And so at the end of each year, you would pull your couch outside into the street, set it on fire. And that was such a no-brainer to me. In fact, there was a great band called Burning Couches. And when I was there was a really great metal band called Ugly Kid Joe, who happens to appear in the soundtrack of the new 21 Jump Street. And on the back of their CD cover of As Ugly as I Want to Be, you'll see them sitting on a couch, and behind them will be a pyramid of other couches. Because as time went on, the hippies of Isla Vista, of which there are many, said, shouldn't we recycle these couches? Why are we just burning them? The fire department, by the way, was very upset because sometimes the couches would be close to telephone poles, and they would set the whole pole on fire by accident, or trees on fire by accident, and that could lead to an awful lot of mayhem in a college area where that 1 square mile was hugely densely populated.
Now, tell me about this Midwestern setting you came to Santa Barbara from, or came to Los Angeles from, and then to Santa Barbara. Where do the origins go back? I mean, what part of the Midwest?
The northwest suburbs of Chicago, a little place called Hanover Park, Illinois, where very safe place to live. You played baseball in the middle of the streets. You had big wheels. You didn't have bicycle locks until you went to school for some reason. You had to lock your bike at school, but you could just throw it in front of your friend's house when you came home. We would play baseball in sod farms. It was a pure Midwestern experience in that very little teenage pregnancy, very little drugs, very little crime. It was a very blissful place, a very great childhood for me. And yet, the day after high school, I wanted to get the hell out of there and come to the sinful, beautiful city of Los Angeles.
Now, as a resident, as someone who grew up in the northwestern suburbs of Chicago, are you allowed to like Los Angeles? It seems like there's almost a rule that maybe you can go to Los Angeles, but Chicago has always got to be number one in your heart. Like they won't let you leave unless you promise to come back or feel like you always want to come back. What's the story there?
Midwestern people are very forgiving, very sweet people who, just because they don't tend to leave doesn't mean that they don't let people leave. And the Midwest will also always be number one in my heart. I sit in front of you with a Cubs hat on and with a lot of love in my heart for the 312. However, I'm never going back there. I love those people. I love the Cubs. I love Wrigley Field. I love old-style beer and deep dish pizza and hot dogs and Harry Carey and all that kind of stuff. But it's warm here, and the girls put out. So I'm staying.
Not the case in Chicago? I know it's not warm.
I was a virgin until I came to California.
And so that, if anything, was that part of the sort of, I felt like I had to go to Los Angeles, well, for one reason above many, but I'm sure for many reasons, Los Angeles exerted its tractor beam upon you. That's one. What are some of the others?
Sports. There used to be a thing called Monday Night Baseball on ABC, and for a guy in April when there was still snow on the ground to see the Dodgers play baseball in a stadium where right beyond the bullpen were 3 or 4 beautiful palm trees and the sun was setting. I mean, Wrigley Field is the most beautiful baseball park in the whole wide world. The Lord, I believe, has built Wrigley Field. But I think Hollywood made Dodger Stadium, and Hollywood did a great job. Even now, 50 years later, it's still a beautiful place. And those palm trees, though, is something that definitely lured me in here.
So you go from the blissful Midwestern childhood to Los Angeles, and then you go to Santa Barbara and the Eden that is Isla Vista, the collegiate Eden. But people seem to know in Isla Vista, at least when I was there, it was the case that in the back of their minds, or maybe in the front, they knew they couldn't stay there very long. Like, the day is coming for all of us. We have to go. Yeah. How aware of that were you while living there?
Everyone told us this is not real. Where you're at is not real, and I fought it. There was one summer where I never left Isla Vista, and thank God I dated a girl my senior year who was a junior, because that allowed me to stay in IV for one extra bonus year. And it made me sad to think that you couldn't stay in this paradise. But They were right. I do have a friend, by the way, who has stayed in Isla Vista these last 21 years, and his liver is very sad about that.
Yeah, there's that danger as well, but there's also, it does seem to me that, a city like Santa Barbara or the Portlands or San Franciscos of the world, you can live in them, but the world seems to regard you as not taking your work seriously if you do it. Like, oh, you care about living in Santa Barbara, you care about living in Portland. You don't really care about what you're doing. You're just kind of dicking around, right? In some cases may be true. I don't know if it's always true, but that seems to happen. Is it a shame? I don't know. But do you perceive that as going on as well? Like, unless you live in select places, the world wonders if you're really playing hardball.
It depends on what it is that you want to do. If you want to change the world, you got to leave Santa Barbara at some point. If you want to raise a family or be a really great college professor, that's all fine and good, but what are you going to teach the kids? You've basically stayed in the land of the lotus eaters for the longest time, which is okay, and it might be leading by example in a way to say, oh no, kids, you can live the life that you want to live, and if that means staying in the 805, knock yourself out. But even when I lived in San Francisco, there was a drive inside of me that said, you have to go somewhere big and you have to do something big. And it's okay to be the big fish in a small pond, but maybe you can also be a big fish in a big pond. And those are the people I've always looked up to. Those are the people who I enjoyed talking with while they traveled through Santa Barbara. And it was definitely one of the people that I wanted to be. And so I totally understand why people would be resistant to staying there and why other people would judge them. But like my friends in Illinois, they stayed in their comfort zones. Why is it that we can't stay in ours in such a beautiful place? But it is strange that people usually don't stay there.
Now, the audience is going to be thinking, this Tony Pierce he lived outside Chicago. He grew up there, and he lived in Santa Barbara. He lived in San Francisco, yet he has this love of Los Angeles he writes about on the Busblog. It's sounding more and more improbable to certain people. I mean, I think I understand it because I moved here because I like it. But having lived in especially San Francisco and still being able to not only not hate but love Los Angeles, people have wondered, people have looked at you kind of askance about that before, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll put it this way. In San Francisco, I had it all. I had a girlfriend that I loved to death. I had an apartment with a garage.
Rare thing in San Francisco, as I understand.
Hard to do. Really, really hard to do. We had a dishwasher, washer, dryer, every modern convenience you want. At the time, I had a 35-inch TV, which at the time was huge. This was 98. I had 3 jobs. One of them was selling beer at Candlestick Park for the Giants. I had my own business installing satellite dishes and high-end audio into a lot of the rich people's houses in the Bay Area. And I had dozens and dozens of friends, most of whom were from Santa Barbara. I had it all. And yet there was something inside me that was saying there's a little bit more, and it's not just kids, but there's something more. And that something more is probably in L.A. And so I came
probably in L.A. You were fairly certain. You're getting close to certainty that whatever it was here.
I had no idea. In fact, I don't know how deep we want to get on this podcast, but I read this passage in the Bible where it's the parable of the rich prince, where the prince basically said the same thing to Jesus and said, "Hey, man, I've got it all. What's next?" And Jesus said, "Sell everything and follow me." I sold everything.
How long did that take? I mean, this is pre-Craigslist, is it? Or no? Did you have Craigslist?
It was pre-Craigslist. I just told all my friends, and I opened the door and I said, "Everything's $1." And everything was pretty much sold except for the big TV. The girlfriend wanted to keep that. And long story short, I ended up in L.A. Well, first I went to Mexico for a very short period of time, but then I was in L.A. Working at a .com startup, and within 6 months I was making triple the money that I was making with my 3 jobs. So,
was this a startup bubble type venture, or was this a legitimate sort of they're still around, they're still making money, or were you out of there before the bubble burst?
I was laid off as the bubble was bursting, but this company is still around under a different name. It's one of the few companies that survived the bubble, and the reason that I was laid off was the president at the time was giving tax breaks to companies to outsource. So they decided to move most of their operations overseas.
Now, how long from that point, getting laid off from the tech company, did you turn your sights toward Busblog?
Only a few years later. This was around 2000 when I was laid off, and 2001 is when the Busblog happened.
You mentioned earlier wanting to give, I guess, a window into the experience of this guy who does not come from another country, but rides the buses in Los Angeles. I mean, tell me a little more about that. What types of things that happened to you did you want to convey, or what sort of experiences were you having that you felt like were not reaching people before you started Busblog?
Well, most of my friends had cars. Most of my friends had normal lives. I felt they were normal lives, and but they were on their blogs very, very smart people like Matt Welch, who's now the editor-in-chief of Reason Magazine, a really great libertarian magazine out of D.C. Ken Lane, the former editor and publisher of Wonket. They were obsessed with the war, the impending Iraq War, Bush Cheney, and the shenanigans that they were up to. And even though the Busblog dabbled in politics, that's not really where my heart was. And whereas Welch called his blog the War Blog, I was like, well, I don't want it to be War Blog. And so that's kind of how Busblog's name started too.
I don't know about war, but I do know about buses.
You should write about what you know. And as much as I love Welch, even though he is a public transportation user, I don't remember him ever writing about that, probably because he had a car. It was a crappy car, but it was a car. And so in a strange way, to be very frank with you, my blog has always been a calling card to the beautiful girls of the world to say, look at me, look at me, look at me.
All the single ladies, huh?
That's right. And so, although I wasn't sure about putting a ring on it, I just wanted to let them know I was around and I was a little bit different than everybody else. And so some of the stories were about the strange and interesting things that you'd see on an LA city bus or subway. Also, to let them know that there was a subway in LA, which most people didn't know.
I find it's still interestingly true. I will talk about that. And I do write it like a dozen times a week. And they're building more trains all the time. And it's like, so I just took the subway too. And they're like, wait, slow down. Los Angeles subway. I think you maybe made that up. They'll accuse me of fabricating it. What's the deal with that?
Well, it's great if you happen to live where it's at, and a lot of people don't live where it's at. And I just happen to have lived in Hollywood for the last 10 years. So, and I've worked
on the right side of Hollywood to get the subway too. It doesn't go everywhere in Hollywood.
That's right. That's right. And so I think if you live and work near the subway, then you'll take it because it's so easy and it's clean. And it'll get you there pretty quick. I mean, we're sitting next to the Gold Line, which runs from Union Station through Pasadena.
Took it here, in fact.
And how'd you like it?
I like the Gold Line. It's shiny. It's got. Well, I mean, here's what's fascinating, and this is a subject that I think you'll have something to say about. Is the different lines you can watch different people. Like you're in a different crowd. Every line. The Gold Line going north to Pasadena is one crowd. Going south to East LA, another crowd. The Red Line. The subway, its own crowd. The Blue Line, very much its own crowd. The Expo Line opening in a few days, it will have its own crowd. I mean, how does it anthropologically break down for you as far as who rides what and sort of what kind of environment you get to observe when you are or were riding around these sort of conveyances, the public transit of Los Angeles?
Well, I still use it. In fact, I use it less now for commuting for work, ironically, even though we're so close to the Gold Line. I use it more for partying. It's great to, the Kings played the Canucks and clinched the first round of the playoffs in hockey the other day, and I had friends who wanted me to meet them near Hollywood and Vine. Well, there's a Red Line stop 2 stops away from me. And so one of my favorite bars, Dylan's, has all these beers on tap for $3 a glass. Well, $3 a glass, I'm going to have a few. And so I would much rather hop on the subway and really enjoy myself at the bar than be driving around. And so I tend to use the subway more when I want to drink a little bit. So to answer your question, though, not only will you see and experience lots of different cultures on the different lines, you're absolutely right. You'll see more black people on the blue line. You'll see more brown people on the orange line going south and out to El Mariachi Square on the gold line. And you'll see probably a few more white people on the red line, depending on which way you're going. But also, what day and what time matters a great deal too, because if you're on the red line at night, on a night where there's either a concert or a sporting event at Staples, you'll see a whole bunch of people wearing Kings jerseys or Clippers jerseys or Lakers jerseys, depending on who you're seeing. If there's a concert happening down there, you'll see little kids maybe with their parents. It's a very, very different experience than I've seen in any other metropolis.
I'll run a theory by you. A lot of the people I've met who live here or have lived here for a long time and always are going on about how I hate Los Angeles. I wish I could move. This place, this sucks. This isn't a city. This is just an endless series of inconveniences and trashy people and just coarseness. It does seem to me that they live lifestyles where they sort of wall themselves off from the city itself. You know, they may live 20 miles away. They may drive to work. They may just sort of go back and forth between a series of fixed destinations in a way where they don't have to get a feel for the fabric of the city. That might sound a little grand, but is that going in a direction you think I might have a point eventually if I clarify that? I mean, people can avoid being present in Los Angeles but live here for decades. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, but I think that they will probably have those gripes even if they lived in New York or Paris. And those people probably should examine themselves and stop projecting onto the city. One reason I like the city so much is anything is possible here, I believe, and there are so many different types of opportunities here than they'll experience anywhere else. But it's not going to knock on your door. In fact, that'd be a little scary if it did. You're going to have to knock on its door. And so if you're not enjoying the shallowness, let's say, of the people of Hermosa Beach, then leave Hermosa Beach. If you think that the valley is beneath you, then move. You can still work where you want to work. I know a lot of people say, well, I live here because I work here. So have a half-hour commute. Have a 45-minute commute. It's okay. Listen to KPCC on your way. We have some really interesting content. Download a podcast if you want. I like to listen to Howard Stern from time to time. I mean, there's a lot you can do as you commute to your work. A lot of people have moved downtown LA, which is a whole different vibe than any other part of the city. And I don't care if you work in Sherman Oaks. You can probably figure out a way to get out there in a quicker amount of time than you think. So move if you don't like it.
When you got here, downtown Los Angeles was probably not the too expensive to move into place that I found it was when I moved here about 7-8 months ago, right? It was, I don't know if they were giving it away, but at that time you wouldn't have really wanted to live there, or what did it look like?
Well, it looked a lot like how it still looks today, minus Staples Center and that whole LA Live business. I didn't know even one person who lived downtown. Maybe I knew one, Jim Gilliam, who was one of the original people at business.com, and before that, I believe Alta Vista. He's an engineer who's always been keeping it real. God bless Jim. And he was a loft dweller. He was definitely somebody who, very tall guy too. So I think that's one reason he liked lofts too. But he was also just very alternative type person. But for somebody who really, really liked the beach and enjoyed Hollywood, I couldn't imagine going all the way out to downtown to live. But some people like that city vibe. They like the fact that on Broadway you can get a piñata and then an awesome electric guitar. And keep walking, and then go to the greatest transvestite bar that you've ever heard of, and then 2 feet further in the back, There's a great punk rock bar. I'm thinking about La Cita. There's so many different options in downtown that people who live down there, I don't think it's a secret, but they don't seem to be telling a lot of people. And that might be for the best. But back then, very little going down there other than the Pantry, which I enjoyed a great deal. And across the street from that was the Variety Arts Center, which is now closed, which was kind of a punk rock place. And there was another punk rock bar called Arts, I believe it was Arts Bar. That was really good too. But it was really a place that you tried not to go at night, although you always ended up there at night. And it definitely didn't have the hipster vibe that it has now.
Now, we've mentioned that you work here at KPCC, the public radio station, one of the several public radio stations here in Los Angeles, and we've mentioned the need to knock on Los Angeles's door. Now, you also worked at a site that a lot of people use as a means of finding out where the doors are in Los Angeles, LAist. Now, what is this site for people who don't know what that is?
LAist? LAist is a hyper-local blog. I wouldn't call it a site. It's a hyper-local blog that that's been around since either 04 or 05 that focuses specifically on LA. It tries to be an alternative voice to both the LA Weekly and the LA Times. And it does that by incorporating dozens of voices who write for it.
What kind of voices? I mean, I want to get across the texture of the it becomes the collective LAist voice, but what sort of voices are those if they're not the voices you hear in the Weekly and not the voices you hear in the Times? I mean, that leaves a lot of voices, but which ones does LAist choose from in your experience there?
Well, LAist doesn't pay anybody other than the editor and now a few assistant editors. And my belief is when you're not being paid for something, you can keep it more real. As real as I try to keep it wherever I work, when you don't have to worry about being fired, you're probably going to keep it a little bit more real. And so the voices that I see on LAist today are people who really love the city or love aspects of the city, and they have now a platform that reaches millions of people a month who are similarly interested in either food or hiking or bike riding or nightlife that can be talked about as it happens. LAist, when I started working there in 06, was the only hyperlocal blog in LA that allowed 30 people, let's say, to write on it. There was blogging.la, who at the time got more hits than LAist. No longer is the case. But the LA Times didn't have any blogs, and the Weekly didn't have any blogs. There was a great blog called LA Taco that had a couple of people writing on it. But still, when I took it over, I said, as awesome as I am as a writer, I'm not a 42-year-old punk rock mom. And so her experience of the city or of this event or of that restaurant is going to be very, very different than mine. So let's add her to the chorus. Let's have a guy in Manhattan Beach that's so obsessed with marijuana that he takes pictures of it every single day. Let's have him review it as one would review wine. The smells, the taste, the aftertaste, all that kind of thing. And so I was able to, thanks to the publisher of Gothamist, the parent company of LAist, I was able to assemble 30 different people who were all so spectacularly different that together every day we would create about 20 different blog posts that would talk about so many different aspects of LA that it was irresistible.
How important has that been as a strategy for you to live here, to hear the voices of people who are having a completely different experience than you and maybe tap into it that way and be able to explore it that way? If you get my meaning, you know, it seems like there's a lot can remain closed to you if you just sort of let it here, right?
Oh, sure. I mean, with 1,000 TV channels and the internet and all that, you can hold yourself in your house pretty well. And trust me, I try. As outgoing as it may seem that I am, in a perfect world, I would probably stay inside for most of the day. But But in that group blog mentality, which was one that I never knew about before, because the Busblog was far more successful than it deserved to be. At one point, it was in the top 200 of millions and millions of blogs.
And what pushed it above the level you thought it deserved to be successful at?
It didn't deserve to be successful at all. I was lying. I was riding a bus, whoop-de-doo. I wasn't handsome. I wasn't rich. I wasn't really meeting any famous people. It was just BS about a guy trying to kiss a pretty girl. And so of millions and millions of blogs, this is going to be the one that people go to and comment and read and tell their friends about. I didn't think that was as important as many of the other blogs that I was enjoying.
But you write consistently. It's got a voice that you don't hear anywhere else. I mean, you would hear things from people that would tell you what you were doing right, in a sense, or even if you didn't agree with them, right?
I didn't agree with most of them. I didn't agree with the ones that liked it or the ones that didn't like it. And one thing I learned from Howard Stern was keep that all public. If you don't like something, yell it. If you're going to yell at this guy and have a fight, put it in a place where people could read it. And so I would fight with them in the comments. I would fight with them in blog posts. I'd go to their blogs and fight with them. And I carried that over to LAist. Some people would say that the comments of LAist were better than the posts.
What do you like to fight about on the internet? What are rich topics of debate for you to get into?
My favorite debate were anonymous commenters, anonymous negative commenters specifically. People who would show up with a fake name and try to diss whatever it was that I wrote, or worse, what my volunteer writers at LAist would write. And so immediately I would talk about their moms. I would tell them what part of my body they could kiss first. Yes. And people, God, did they love that.
Why did they like that so much? I mean, I guess it's just a basic sort of human nature, compelling to read. It's like, oh, look at these guys. They're really getting into it.
Well, I mean, I went to Santa Barbara, and I was a graduate from the College of Creative Studies. I wrote for the Daily Nexus. I was an editor, award-winning editor at the Daily Nexus. I felt like I could write okay. And so if you want me to fight, I'm going to probably be able to fight better than you. So I'll step into that fight every single time. In fact, I'll call you out and make you fight with me. And especially if you dared criticize the spelling, OMG, of one of the lines in this really long post that of substance, you're going to ignore all of that content that this person has spent days working on in their spare time, and you're going to call us out for their grammar. Well, you've stepped on the wrong toe. And well, needless to say, when I started at LAist, maybe it is needful to say, our page views were about 100,000 page views a month. When I left, it was 1.6 million. And I think that some of it was due to the fact that it was never boring, either in the posts or in the comments. And another part was, with all of those people, there was somebody that you could relate to.
It seems like, I mentioned you do the blog editing here at KPCC. It seems like KPCC is going to want that minimized, right? They're going to say, no kissing of body parts, nothing about anybody's mother. I mean, am I right? Or is it just sort of implied, like maybe less of that stuff? What sort of sense do you have about that?
Well, God bless these people. Nobody has ever said that to me, but I believe it's implied. I mean, this is a professional organization. This is the most popular public radio station in Los Angeles. KCRW is probably the best known, but more people actually listen to KPCC, strangely to me at least, because I'm a huge music fan, and I didn't think that more people listen to news than to music, but times change, and I guess you can listen to Radiohead on your Walkman on your iPhone. You don't need to tune into radio to wait for it to get it played. But yeah, when I moved from LAist to the LA Times, it was also implied there that I wasn't going to call anybody's mother out and say, why would you give birth to this courageless, this wimp who dares hide behind a fake name and dares question me.
Now, it's fascinating that on Busblog, you've essentially gotten well known for making your very own genre of blogging that I've never seen an imitation of. I mean, there's the feel of Busblog, and then there's the feel of all other blogs, but you've also been hired by the LA Times. You've edited LAist. You edit the blogs at KPCC. I mean, it seems like they could just as easily say, no, this guy's too artistic a blogger or what have you. We can't have him doing it. Yet they, how did that happen? I mean, how did you show how did you show both your Busblog side and I guess the side that could edit KPCC blogs at once? Because it seems like they wouldn't even be in the same person, much less that it is right here and he's sitting in front of me.
Yeah. I guess I have to give all credit to Meredith Artley, who now runs CNN.com. She was the editor of all the she was the website managing editor of the LA Times when I wrote her, and I informed her that LAist was quadrupling the number one blog at the LA Times. At that point, working for the LA Times was the biggest dream that I ever had. In fact, on the Busblog, I believe as early as 2002, I would write letters to the LA Times in public saying, "Dear LA Times, you should hire me. By the way, you suck. This is where you effed up today. This is where you effed up yesterday."
Where were they sucking at that time? What were they doing really wrong?
Well, I mean, good book says, "Seek and you shall find." And so I think with as much content as they were putting out there, and as much content that they weren't putting out there, it would be very easy for a critic to say, "This is what you were missing." And so I would try to use that in maybe a pathetic way to get people to pay attention to me. In no way did I ever think that I was ever going to get a job there, let alone oversee all of the blogs at the LA Times. And so, again, with freedom, you do some crazy stuff. And so, one of the crazy things I did was write Meredith and say, if you don't hire me, I'm going to have to learn what the word is after quadruple, because this train that we've got going on in LAist has only just begun. I'd only worked there for a year and a half, and we had already multiplied our pages by 10 times. I'd seen that the LA Times were trying to get into the business of the blogs in a bigger way, and I for sure wanted to be part of it. And they, thank God, gave me a shot. And I think what Meredith saw underneath it all was the fact that LAist was really the David to the Goliath of the LA Times. And so how else were we supposed to compete with them other than to do things that they couldn't do? The editor couldn't get into the comments and tell all the critics where to go.
What to kiss.
That's right. And they couldn't really cover local music the way that we did. They couldn't go to Thai Town, let's say, and unleash all 30 of their writers to 30 restaurants in Thai Town and have 30 reviews in a month of Thai Town. There was so much that they couldn't do that a small upstart blog could do, that I think what Meredith saw was he's doing what he can where he's at. And let's see if he can instill some of that in this huge machine.
At LAist, did you wonder at any time, we can send out this army of 30 bloggers to Thai Town and they'll come back with reviews and they're doing it for free. This is great. Like, I'm getting all this content. But did you wonder, what if the day comes when they say pay up? And it's kind of the tuck at the collar. Like, was that a concern?
It was not a concern, because this is a city of millions of people. All I needed was 30. And I bet you I could find 30 that could. What I was more afraid of was they would get noticed and poached by other people. Sure. And part of me was nervous about that, but part of me was very happy that that would be the case, because that would mean that 30 new people would show up and say, I want to get poached too. And so under my reign, we had, I believe, 7 or 8 people get paying jobs. Some of them at LA Times, a couple of them, one of them still works at the LA Times. What
were they writing about that got them so noticed and then poached?
Well, Alina Shatkin, who's now a senior editor at Los Angeles Magazine, was my film editor. Adam Rose, who is my sports editor, is now the training editor at Huffington Post, and he travels around the country, if not the world, training people. I don't know what there is to train, but
he's doing it.
He's doing it, and he's one of Ariana's favorite people in the whole wide world. Lisa Brenner, who now works for me here at KPCC, was picked up by the Daily News' LA.com as an entertainment writer. She was my music editor. Joey Maloney, who is one of my photographers, now takes photos for Getty. Jeff Koga now takes photos for the porn industry, believe it or not. I guess they need still photos too. So people saw what they were doing, and they were able to use what they did at LAist in their portfolio and say, hey, I've done this in front of lots of people before. I've worked with these sources. I've interviewed these people. I've worked with these publicists. I can do that for you too.
Through this whole time, this whole over a decade, whether you're working for LAist, whether you're working for the LA Times, whether you're working for KPCC, you're always doing Busblog. You're always writing Busblog. Were there any points where you were like, I'm making it, I'm rolling, maybe Busblog did what it had to do? Or was it always like, I've got to write Busblog because if I don't have this side expressing itself, I can't do any of this other stuff I do during the day?
I can do the stuff without the Busblog. And there have been numerous times where I've thought about quitting.
Psychologically, can you do all this stuff without having the Busblog? I mean, is it a necessary outlet for you now that it's just hard to envision a life without? Or do you still think, maybe today's the end?
I never want to end the Busblog. It's part of my philosophy when I talk to writers, especially writers who work for me, to say, we as creative people, we as writers, can actually produce a lot more than we think we can. In fact, we can produce stuff for money, and we can produce things for fun that are sitting there waiting to come out. And if we don't allow ourselves different avenues, they won't ever come out. And we only have a limited time on this planet, and it's not going to come out of the knucklehead across the street. So it better come out of us. And so if I feel like, one of my heroes is Pete Rose. And one of the reasons he's my hero is he leads by example. And, he's the guy that got more hits in baseball than anybody. And so who better of a manager or coach could you want than somebody who is actually able to do it? I don't know if I'll always be a blog editor, but if I am, it's great to be able to say, hey, I wrote 5 posts yesterday. In fact, yesterday I think I wrote 4 for KPCC and 2 for the Busblog. If I can do it, and I got terrible grades in school, and I've got carpal tunnel now, and I'm fat, and I'm losing it, you, awesome person, can certainly do it. And so I like to lead from example, and I like to, if I am inspiring to anybody, I want it to be not just my words. I want it to be my actions too.
When you're writing for KPCC versus the Busblog, I mean, what subjects go through your brain and end up coming out the KPCC spout, and what subjects come out through the Busblog spout, if that makes sense? Is it a difference in subject, or just I'm going to take whatever subject in Los Angeles and think about it in a different way for those two? Which is it? Is it subject, or is it sort of manner of thought?
Well, it's definitely subject. Yesterday, I was writing a lot because one of my crime writers was driving from LA to San Francisco, and so he couldn't write. And another one of my writers was assigned to do something else. So we needed about 4 to 5 crime stories for our blog here called LAist. And I was on a search for crime stories, and in a really weird way that, again, probably only happens in LA, there was a car chase. This time, though, it was the police chasing a tow truck. And so I was like, good Lord, you do love me, and I love you right back, buddy. And so I started blogging about this car chase, and it was really, really exciting. I took pictures of the TV. I used Storify to aggregate people's tweets. Thank God it was a 2.5-hour car chase. The guy drove very, very slowly, and then he drove closer and closer to my neighborhood. Oh. And then he drove closer and closer to my house. So I put on my shoes, I grabbed my camera, and I ran outside, and I was able to take a couple pictures of this crazy tow truck. And
you were at home? It was coming?
I happened to be at home because I told my bosses I can't be the blog editor and a blogger at the same time. People are going to pull me aside. I need to because I'm not Superman. Right. I need to work from home.
Right. And today. The tow truck's getting closer.
Tow truck just happened to be coming to my neighborhood. And I ran outside and was able to take a picture. So it was great.
Where did this chase wrap up for those who aren't familiar with the story? What was the ultimate end to this epic thing that went right by your door?
He He drove around Hollywood in the Valley and then back to Hollywood, and then he ran out of gas in Glendale.
No, that seems to be the way these things happen. And they run out of gas somewhere. Sometimes it's up there. Sometimes it's in Koreatown where I live. So they sort of divide the car chase endings. But tell me, I mean, your experience in Los Angeles is not only, I mean, it's longer than mine, certainly, but it's also close to the ground isn't the word, but you've gotten yourself close to so many different parts of the way the city works because of the writing you've done and because of the experiences you've had. I mean, what can you look back, whether it's on early Busblog or whether it's before that even, what can you look back and say you really didn't know about Los Angeles before you had the career you've had here?
I would probably say downtown, because downtown was not a place where my peers hung out. I mean, obviously people lived there, and a lot more people lived there decades ago. I was not aware of it until, I mean, I was obviously aware of it, but I wasn't as aware of it until I started working there when I worked at the Times and ate lunch all around that part of it. Now overseeing the 10 blogs that we have here, including Blog Downtown, I now assign stories, and I go down there and take pictures, and occasionally I'll talk to people down there. And obviously it's grown a lot since the mid-'80s when I moved out here. So I would probably say watching downtown in this new era of rebirth has been fascinating.
Now, when I moved here in the summer, it was like downtown is booming. That was happening when I came here. I only know Los Angeles as a place with a booming downtown. I only know it as a place where the rail network is growing. I only know it as a place where it's not only not so weird to not have a car, but I've never even considered getting one. Oh. Now, it's the way that I see the city now, but everybody I talk to seems to say, well, you wouldn't have thought that if you'd moved here 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Do you think we're in some time of vastly accelerated change in Los Angeles, or am I just sort of like dropping in when the party happens to be pretty hot and it'll cool down? I mean, what's your perspective on this from the longer range that you have?
Huge change here, especially on quote unquote the east side, and I like to call anything east of.
This is an important point because I need to get your official streets dividing west, central, and east. What do you use?
See, even the equipment here is freaking out because you can't win in this debate. If you live in East LA, downtown is the dividing part, and people who
maybe you could say the river is a divider.
Yeah, a lot of people try to say that that's the case, but that means that Echo Park is west side. I don't think so.
Now, do you do east and west or east, west, and central? How do you think about it?
Well, I like to start fights. So I say east and west. Sure. And I like to say that, well, I'll put it this way. I'll say that western is what divides east and west. Not that I would...
An unusual street to pick.
Yeah. I'm a weirdo, as I think we've established by now.
I don't have skin in the game, don't worry. But I mean, listeners are going to be freaking out. You know, they'll say, no, La Cienega, no, La Brea, no, right. You know. But western.
Those are okay. I'm willing to say that that's okay.
Well, actually, maybe the question is, why is it important to people to be on one side of that divide? Like, why would I care if I was on the west side or east side? What is the nature of that distinction other than geographical?
Well, I think people, other than Snoop Dogg, would say that it's not cool to be on the West Side. You're a yuppie. You're a hit. You're not. You're just not cool. You've sold out. You're soft. You are all those negative things that you said that some people consider L.A. in that you drive a BMW. You don't listen to good music. You have no soul.
You're never going to learn there's a subway.
That's for sure.
Until 2036.
That's right. And you might vote out a subway coming down your part of town, which all that, of course, is not true because Culver City is certainly on the western half of L.A. and a lot of people love Culver City. And even more dramatic, people would never say that about Venice. Maybe now they would say that Venice is more gentrified than it was in the Dogtown eras of the 70s and 80s. But Venice keeps it real. But I think it's important because I like to remind people that East LA is part of LA, and East LA is a vital and important part of LA. And
some of the best food in the entire city.
These taco trucks that are all the rage now all came out of East LA, and they had to, because they had to get the food to the people, to more of the people, and
they just truck it straight over to the west side.
That's right. And so, East LA is a huge part of LA, and it's such an important part of LA, and so it's important for those people to have some sort of ownership that, hey, just because you live in Silver Lake doesn't mean that you are part of us. And so some of them will say, you're not East LA, and you're not the East Side. And so there's an authenticity there that they are right to lay claim to, which is why I love the East Sider blog, because Jesus, who runs it, a former LA Times writer who does a fantastic job of blogging, is like, okay, yeah, it's true. I write about East Hollywood, Echo Park, Eagle Rock, and Silver Lake, but I'm still going to call it East Sider because that's what I think it is.
There's a lot of that in Los Angeles, that this is the area I think I'm in. It kind of becomes the area you are in, isn't it?
I guess. I mean, I think the East-West argument is fun over maybe a half a beer, but not over a full beer. And it's silly because ultimately, when the big one strikes, we're all going to die.
Right. Yeah. Just to keep the big one in mind. You'll worry less about Western or La Cienega. Now, on the Busblog and elsewhere, I believe I've heard you mention, or I've read you mention, Charles Bukowski as a reference point for a writer in the city, or as a way to think about it, or as a way to sort of get into it. What is he for you in this context of cultural Los Angeles?
Well, he's definitely somebody who kept it real, and even though he lived part of his life on "quote unquote" the West Side, his best stories were when he was in downtown LA way back in the day, and then later in Hollywood. In fact, one of his best books is called Hollywood, which paints a far different picture of the movie industry and the more established Charles Bukowski, the revered writer and the person who could do something for these money-making people. But what I love about Charles Bukowski the most is he always had a positive attitude. No matter how horrible his life was, no matter how ugly he felt his face was, no matter how repulsive he was for the ladies or how drunk he was or poor he was. And it wasn't a chipper, to complete that sentence, he was always positive. And
people wouldn't know that about him necessarily unless they'd read him.
Right. But even if you read him very closely, you'll never hear him say at the end of one of his poems, and I think he was one of America's top 5 poets ever. You never heard him say, and I want to kill myself. He might say something like, and I'm waiting, or I'm waiting for this to end. But it's not like a depressing thing. It's more of a realist thing. For the most part, though, he was getting laid. He was being successful. He was writing that next poem.
Wasn't so bad.
He was getting that next job. He always was doing something, and that mirrored his life. Yes, he didn't really make any real money until the latter half of his life, but he was really living every single day that he was out there. And I think that that contrasts somebody like Hemingway, who never seemed happy wherever he was. Even when Hemingway was writing The Sun Also Rises and he was young and living in Paris and handsome and tall and burly and macho, he was alone. Brett did not want him. This beautiful woman. None of these people were satisfied with Hemingway, and Hemingway wasn't satisfied with himself. In the end, he killed himself. So And I like to compare those two authors an awful lot because to me, they had somewhat similar styles in that they were absolute alcoholics and they painted in brushstrokes that were not necessarily realistic. Hemingway always had poetry in his prose, and I feel like Bukowski had prose in his poetry. And Bukowski tried to write in a little grittier type of filter, and Hemingway tried to make things look a little prettier than they really were. But I think Bukowski was far more of an optimist, and I appreciate that.
So when you sit down next to do your own writing on Busblog, here it's over a decade old, it's far into its existence, especially in blog terms, and we're in this changing Los Angeles that wasn't maybe changing in this way when you started Busblog. What's going to be important to you to get out about your life in this city to someone reading in Chicago or Phoenix or Santa Barbara? What right now is still an important side to show that people still don't know about what it's like for you to live here?
To be honest, I don't think about that. I just want the ladies of the world to know I'm available.
That's an answer. Maybe that's what I'm looking for. It's you still want the reader to know you're out there, you're available, right here in Los Angeles. I mean, is that not a suitable answer to my question?
Well, it's probably not the answer that a fancy writer would say, but I guess I don't pretend to be a fancy writer.
The non-fanciness is in some ways, depending on how you define non-fanciness, that's one of the reasons Busblog continues to speak to people, is it's inventive but doesn't have to be all fancy about it.
I guess I don't know if it speaks to people. I guess it does. You seem very intellectual and well read, and you're talking to me. So apparently it does have some reach, and that still blows my mind. It baffles me that there's an audience out there because I feel like it is such a personal blog. It is so rooted in the I. If you took a shot for every I that I wrote just in the last 10 days, you'd be drunk really fast. And I don't think that, especially I'm in public radio now, and I still have readers, and people still retweet me and put me on Facebook now and all that stuff. There's a nice woman who wants to write, or not write, but compile some of my blog posts together for an iPad book. All that stuff blows my mind. I don't write for the audience. I don't write for we can joke and say that, yeah, I would like all the pretty girls of America to send me their photos and tell me how awesome I am. But I don't think that any of that stuff is going to happen. And when it does happen, it's really a shock to me. So I don't write for any of those people. If I did have a message for all those people out there, it would be, I'm a loser and look at my success. You are probably far more interesting than you give yourself credit for. You're probably far more advanced than I will ever be. Why aren't you trying to do this? Because all the rewards that I've had, you could have had, and you still can have, and they could be way bigger than this.
I've been speaking with Tony Pierce, the author of Busblog, as well as the blog editor at KPCC. Of course, he's edited at LAist. He's blog edited at the LA Times. He's done a lot here in Los Angeles. Plus, he's a fellow gaucho. Tony, thanks so much for taking the time today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. And special thanks to the people backing this season, including Aidan Nullman, Andy Cooney, Ben Bartley, Brian J. Dell, Doubt Us Artwork, Greg Bigelow, Greg Linster, Henry Coronan, Umberto Grant, James Faber, Jonathan McCalmont, Mark Larson, Matt Warren, Mia Muratori, Nicholas Croft, Paul Doyle, Ray McGuire, Rob Montz, Robert Foley, Roberto Medri, Samuel Hansen, Sean Dudley, Small Demons, Stephen Ingles, Steve Himmer, TSD, and Wayne Wright.